Welcome to Clippers Talk for part 2 of this conversation with Darian Vaziri, a.k.a. Dime Dropper. I'm Adam Osland. This is Clippers Talk. It's been a podcast for a long time. 2 weeks ago, I said I need to get with the times and start a YouTube channel. You can find that at Clippers Talk now. Find me at Follow Adam A. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, that was on Locked On Clippers, where Dime Dropper was hosting and peppering me with questions. Now the tables have turned a little bit. I want to go a little bit deeper with one of your favorite Clippers hosts and fans out there, who really has amassed a hell of a following through his passion for this team going into his 20th season, I believe. Darian, thanks for doing this.
Oh man, Adam, this is I'm just honored to be a part of this amazing cast of guests you've had on recently, Clipper media, Clipper fans. I mean, I actually the last couple of days, because I've been behind, I have no time to watch shows anymore. I've taken Podcast P out of the rotation.
Yeah, I hit the eject on that too.
Yeah, and so I literally binged every episode that you made. Rob, Matt Moore, Kelly, Jamal. I was like halfway through Andrews. But I've listened to every single one. Apologies if I'm forgetting any guests that were featured on. Brian, of course. It's been amazing. So
I'm not worthy. Bless you.
Credit to you. It's been awesome.
All right. Well, I'm trying to keep the content coming. We've had 3 shows so far this week, including Jamal Christopher yesterday, Andrew Greifus you mentioned before that. Now we have Dime on.
I forgot Joseph. I'm sorry, Joseph.
Joseph.
Missed Joseph on Twitter.
We do miss Joseph, but I got news for you. He ain't coming back anytime soon.
I wouldn't.
I may have hurt the cause after doing that episode with him. I brought up too many bad memories from Clippers games with Joseph. He's got a love-hate relationship with the team, but I do think he's excited about this season and more optimistic than most. I want to get down to your basketball core a little bit here and the foundation that you've kind of built your principles off of. You always talk about, Darian, basketball convictions. Who are the players that help form those convictions over time? Give me some of those guys and the type of ball that you look for.
Wow. I mean, I think that's a great question. I haven't actually been asked that on a show before, but I think any kid that grew up in Los Angeles during my time, like Kobe Bryant was the example of greatness. Like the whole mama mentality is one thing, and people kind of, twist that so many different ways, but just how hard he seemed to take, how seriously he seemed to take every single game that he played in, at least pre-Achilles, of course. After that, it was totally different, but it felt like every game mattered so much, and that winning was ultimately what meant the most. And, getting better by any means, I think that's something, whenever I hit a wall in school or anything growing up, I always thought, well, Kobe always said, if you just work as hard as you can at something, you can be better at it. And so I always felt as though even if I hit a wall, I'm just going to be the best version of myself that I can be and try to be better at whatever that particular thing is. So I would say Kobe would be number one. And then when we got CP3, I think also in the negative sense, I took a lot of his characteristics. I mean, whining a lot. I didn't bring the foul baiting to the court, though. I never was great at drawing fouls on the court.
My man, you got to get that rip-through move going. Come on.
I know, but CP3, in terms of, like, watching what he did on the court and his handle, that was something that really inspired me. But if we're talking basketball convictions, I like guys that move the ball quickly, that don't spend too much time on the ball. Guys like Larry Bird, Jokic, Magic. I know Magic is interesting because he does have the ball a lot, but the way he just kind of throws it up and pushes it quickly, I love watching that. And I'm trying to think of more modern examples, but somebody who and I know he's a kind of an enemy of us, I actually do love the way Devin Booker plays. And I think you saw so many ways how he can be effective with any sort of players, with Team USA, and also Steph Curry. Like, I am a big proponent of the Warriors offense. Like, ball movement and player movement is always my style. So I would say those are my basketball convictions. And then a defense first mindset to team building, which, as we talked about on Locked On Clippers, is what we're looking at for this upcoming Clippers team. And I also love guys that can play in the mid post and score from 3 levels. So like Kawhi Leonard is I love watching him play, Kobe, Kawhi, guys, Michael Jordan even. And when LeBron in his later years, I want to say like 2012 onwards, when he really got a little bit more of a back-to-basket game after working with Akeem, like in 2018 when he was hitting those crazy turnarounds over against the Raptors. Like I like when LeBron leans into that. So guys that can, score from 3 levels, but mid post, have a mid range game. I love that kind of stuff. So I'd say that, and then moving the ball quickly. So those are my basketball convictions.
You mentioned Kawhi there. What does it feel like to me? I could be wrong. You can clarify, but you haven't fully embraced Kawhi Leonard as a Clipper.
I'm glad you asked. So when we got Kawhi on July 5th, 2019, I was literally the happiest person on the planet. Like I remember I was working at my summer camp that I went to for 15 years. And one of the employees that was just like a little like uptight, like, it was one day he would be in the happiest mood ever. And then the other days he would be just completely a crazy person, just so mean. And I remember one time he said, "Why do you keep freaking smiling, dude? Kawhi this, Kawhi that." And I'm like, the fact that someone's telling me that I look too happy, like that's a great problem to have. So I was ecstatic that whole year. That was my senior year in college. I was talking so much, Adam. You wouldn't even believe it. Like I was like, we got Kawhi. We got the best player in the league. He chose the Clippers. I was like on the Kawhi bandwagon like no other.
Was that the first year with the dime dropper YouTube?
No, that was my senior year of college that got taken by COVID. It got cut short. And the bubble is right before the bubble is when I started Dime Dropper. But my first episode of Dime Dropper was why I didn't want the season to resume, because I was in this weird situation, and I think a lot of other Clipper fans may have felt this way too. And I felt as though we were definitely going to make the conference finals. I was overconfident, and I was like, I've been waiting for us to make it past the second round for so long. I did not wait all this time to potentially see us maybe even win our first ring across the world, across the country. I mean, and I know that sounds really like spoiled, but I'm sorry, but we have a dream as kids, as fans, and I want it to be here at home. Like, I don't want it to be in Orlando with no fans. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm really sorry, but that's how it is. But weirdly, I just couldn't see the Lakers win because I knew I'd have to hear it. So I was kind of in this situation where I was struggling to even get behind the concept of the bubble. And I was dragged in. I was doing content on it. And I just felt as though Kawhi and Paul George just went out a little too weak. We talk about Paul George not emptying the clip against Dallas. Kawhi Leonard shot like almost, was it 30 shots almost against Philly in Game 7 in 2019? And he didn't even shoot, I think, 20 in Game 7 against Denver. I just wanted him to go out swinging, and I just didn't feel like he did that. And so I was really, really pissed after that. But then he did kind of win me over the following year with the amazing performance in 2021 against Dallas. But I will say Paul George won me over even more because the moment that we had with him was so big. Like, and I was there for it. And I was at every single one of those playoff games. But, we reference this night a lot. And as much as it's the Terrence Mann game, Paul George was the face. He was the guy that was going to get blamed had we lost. And he deserves more credit to me than he gets for his performance in Game 6. The dude played like 46 minutes and like rebounded, guarded 1 through 5, had 20 plus points, and grew as the game went on. He didn't shy away as the game went on. So that was
those Terrence Mann shots, those wide open threes don't happen without Paul George and the gravity he had.
Right. So my closing thing with Kawhi is I was still super behind it in 2023. And then these last 2 years, it's just been like, and it's not really necessarily any fault of Kawhi's, but it's 5 years in. And I had season tickets last year, and I saw some incredible regular season Kawhi. But my first thought when we got Kawhi in 2019 was, I can't wait for sold-out Clipper playoff games like we had with Lob City, but with this killer champion on our side. And I've still never gotten to experience this. So it's not, and it's hard for me to get myself excited for another season of the Kawhi experience. I also feel as though when he's not playing, you don't really get the benefits of like for example, Blake Griffin and Chris Paul, and even Paul George, they were such huge ambassadors of the team. I think they did a great job, voicing about how passionate they were playing for the Clippers and this and that. And Kawhi is just not really that kind of guy. He's more behind the scenes. He treats it more like a 9 to 5. And I just don't know if the passion for the organization is there. I don't know if he has that passion for any organization. And I'm a very big guy into the emotions of fandom and stuff like that and playing to the crowd. And he's very business oriented, but I wouldn't have this problem if he was healthy. It's just like, I just don't see like how this has been a very fun experience. So it's nothing against Kawhi, but that's just how I see it. I don't see like this has been a great experience.
It's been frustrating for Clipper Nation. I think overall, the last 5 years, you just had so much hope, and unfortunately, Kawhi's body has betrayed him. You brought up 2020 in the bubble. What's the most disappointed you've been with a Clipper team or a Clipper player? What was the instance of that?
Definitely 2020 Paul George, I would say, is number one. But you know what, Adam? I really was mad at Kawhi because I knew Paul George was suspect in the playoffs because I watched OKC for 2 years. I didn't miss a playoff game. And this was really getting me mad, Adam, when he came to the Clippers. Everyone was looking at the regular season that Paul had and was telling me about the shoulder injuries, and that's why he didn't have a great series. By the way, he still had some good numbers in that Portland series, but I watched the games, and the same exact stuff we criticize him for with the Clippers, the timely turnovers, the looking great one game, and then the next just looking totally different. That happened in that series. That happened against Utah too. And so I was suspect on Paul. So my point is, when a guy, even though he was injured, I'm acknowledging that. When a guy shows me the same things when he's injured as when he's healthy, I think it's more about the player and less about the injury. And Paul George repeated those very things as a Clipper. So I did expect a potential meltdown from him. Kawhi, that was like the only real big blemish of Kawhi's postseason career, if we're really talking about it.
And it was really Game 7.
Yeah,
he was still good in that series overall. He was great against Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the reason they were up 3-1 was because of Kawhi. And those collapses, by the way, I think he still ended up being a plus in the series. Like, it was the Montrezl Harrell minutes instead of Ivica Zubac. It was some stuff from Doc that was a bit of a head scratcher.
It was, but ultimately, we ask our stars to close. And I don't think in Game 6, second half, and Game 7, Kawhi was – because, like, he was the one guy I looked to that you're different than everyone else. You are the champion. You're the reason why I've been puffing my chest out all year. And I just felt very let down. But the thing is, as I said, I forgave him for that. I got over it. It's not like I don't think he tried, but it did feel like a lack of desperation in the way that he played that night. And I think that whole roster didn't even want to be there. And the way they talk about it after is like, I don't like hearing about this, the 2020 and we would have won if the season hadn't shut down. And just we had a golden opportunity, Adam. We had double-digit leads in 3 straight games against the team we had more experience than. But I'm actually very thankful for that collapse. It did a lot in terms of us getting rid of Glenn Rivers and now bringing in Ty Lue. It made 2021 that much more special. And to have that moment where we got out of the second round in front of the fans, I wouldn't trade that for the world. So I'm so thankful. And it also kind of was the start of me building a platform. So I actually think the basketball gods for the bubble collapse because it made next year that much sweeter. And we get stronger with this kind of pain, Adam. We really do. The Clipper fans, they're the most loyal fans in the world, man. And I just want to make people see that.
I don't know if I can go as far as I'm glad they collapsed the bubble, but I will say this. I know damn well that if the Clippers' one championship had come during the most unique setting ever in NBA history, no outside fans would give them credit. If people, and people don't, they don't give the Lakers credit, who already had 16 rings. They weren't giving the Clippers their respect. They would have had to have won in 2021 as well. What's the most proud you've ever been of the Clippers and a player?
That game, Terrence Mann. I mean, Terrence Mann is from Lowell, Massachusetts, and is around my age. So I actually heard about Terrence from my, friends at UMass that, there's this guy, he's from Lowell, he's one of the better players in the state, he might go to the NBA before we even drafted him. So when we got him, I was rooting for him a lot. And the fact that happened in the biggest game possible, I'm forever indebted to him and a lot of the members of that team. And that's why so many Clipper fans are going to stick by Terrence forever. And when we talk about that ambassador and pride for the franchise, Terrence Mann is the first to do any public event for the Clippers, it seems. And he's just such a great ambassador for the team. And the one reason why Clipper fans don't ever get too mad at him is because you just know he's going to give 100% all the time. And that's all you can ask for as a fan.
He's been put in really tough positions and has had to play so many different roles. He's never complained about it. Is he your favorite Clipper, current Clipper? And if so, who's second?
I'd say he's my favorite current Clipper. And then I'd say my second favorite is probably it's either Zoo or Batum. Because Zoo's our longest. What's up?
You got to pick. This is the hot seat.
I'm going to go with Nico. I just love the guy because I liked him in Portland. And so the fact that we got him, I was like, just like we talked about in Locked On, we got him. We're like, this is the guy from Charlotte that was overpaid. He's washed now. But he's proven that to everybody over the last couple of years. He's far from washed.
Yeah. 4 years later, he's still playing well. All right. I got some tough ones here. I want to ask you about this because I saw your comment on X regarding the back-to-back excuse, the Clippers schedule excuse, which was just released recently. You don't like making any excuses. You're a no-nonsense type of guy. Explain your position regarding, where you stand on Clipper Nation sometimes, and people like me, being irked and vexed and annoyed with the schedule, especially in a year where they're opening their own arena and they still have 16 back-to-backs and the second toughest strength of schedule.
Okay, well, I do want to acknowledge that I don't think the Clippers get proper respect, and they never really have by the league. I remember back in the dog days in like 08 and 09, I used to watch games with my Laker fan uncle, and he would root for us because we were so bad. He just wanted us to like get the 8th seed, to have LA have 2 teams in the playoffs, to have his nephew have some joy. So he would root for us. And I remember him saying, like, the Clippers get no respect from officials. Like, so that's the thing to me. It seems like we've never been the beneficiary of big calls in playoff games. Like, I can't think of one. We're always, the campaign steal that we should have had in game 4, 2014, game 5 against OKC. Like, and in those collapses, the 3-1 chokes in game 6 against Houston and in the bubble, we never got a bailout call. Like, it feels like we never get a bailout call. Like, it's just a bad call that goes our way for once. Doesn't happen. And so I do feel as though that the league can be nicer to us, but just like Jamal said on your last episode, it's something that we just can't control. There's 10 other teams.
But how many things do we talk about on these shows that we have no control over?
Well, I'm going to say this. The team can control their performance. We can't control it, but they can control their performance. They can't control the schedule makers making decisions. And plus, what do we complain about more? Back-to-backs or matinee games? We got no matinee games. 0, which I don't think is normal. That's not. I don't even know if that's a good thing.
How many teams with their own arena have a ton of matinee games? Like, that is, I think it's built in. You build an arena, you shouldn't have any matinee games. I can't give much credit to the NBA for that one.
0, though? We don't even have 1 or 2. In the playoffs, we might have a 12:30 game on a Sunday. It happens.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? True. So we have none. We complain.
You don't think the back-to-backs, though, are a legitimate complaint? 16 back-to-backs?
If 10 other teams didn't have them, like, they have to choose someone. You know what I mean? Like, it's
how many of those teams have their own arena? The Lakers only have 13. I
see what you're saying, because they share with a hockey team.
The Lakers pay rent. The Clippers have their own arena, and they still have 3 more back-to-backs than the Lakers.
How many matinee games do the Lakers have? I feel as though we would have found a way to complain somehow. Like, it's just, I do really think that a lot of Clipper fans, like, I think we are the victims of bad luck, injuries mainly throughout the course of our history. But I think sometimes we just look for things to complain about. And I think that's funny coming from me, because a lot of people think I'm some huge complainer. But I just express frustration when things are bad in a very loudmouth way, in a very passionate way. But I really think we just got to suck it up and play. Phoenix game 1, and we go from there.
It's just, when I look at teams' records on the second night of a back-to-back in the NBA, good teams, and they're at like 500 on the second night of a back-to-back. You can't tell me that stuff doesn't have an influence, a big influence on performance. It's easy to say, hey, just suck it up and play. It's another where you just don't have enough left in the tank. It happens.
True.
They're human.
But go ahead.
I think when Jerry West, the late, great Jerry West, when he would speak up about the reasons they need to get their own arena, partially because of the schedule and them getting the short end of the stick, has there ever been a bigger no excuses, no nonsense guy than Jerry West?
No.
And even he would comment on this. Like, it has to be somewhat real and legitimate.
Okay, so, I mean, should we look at the teams that have the 16 back-to-backs and see which ones have their own arena? Because there are probably some of them that do. I mean, they had to choose someone. I think it's a bigger issue because our best player probably won't play them. I think that's the bigger concern.
Yeah. It is, and the league can't account for that. That's not on them in that way. I get where you're coming from. Speaking of old school, Anthony Edwards had a comment recently talking about how outside of Michael Jordan, I'm paraphrasing, the league wasn't very skilled back then. It was Jordan, and he didn't say plumbers, but we know the argument that's been going around since my old friend Barry McCockiner made it probably a damn decade ago. And then JJ Redick and these guys stole the terminology, applied it to their own podcast and ESPN. And there is this schism between the old school and the new school. You're a guy that has gone all the way back as far as you can with the tape, and you're going through eras and studying the game over spans of decades and seeing how it was played. Do you think there's any legitimacy to what Anthony Edwards said, or is he completely out of his mind?
I think Ant spoke up about his lack of interest in watching basketball when he first began his career. He literally came out and said, I don't love watching basketball. I'm more of a football guy. He's like, the refs are soft or the calls are soft. He's like, I don't even like watching it. So given that, and that he's younger than me, which is crazy to believe, he's like an absolute freak of nature, but he is. No, I don't think there's much validity to it because I didn't even get to watch the 90s. I didn't even get to watch Jordan. But obviously, as you said, like I put in a lot of work, but you know, for me, it started with there's no validity. I mean, there's a lot of skilled players in NBA history. I think the thing about skill and the way we use that word is it's become just about shooting and ball handling. And I think there are other skills in the game personally. And I think flashy doesn't always equal better. I think that's one thing that we mistake a lot of is that flashy doesn't always equal better. And you know what's a great example of this comparison, Adam, is Kawhi Leonard versus Paul George. If you put on a Paul George highlight reel to someone, and you show it to them, and then you show Kawhi, they're going to be like, yeah, this Paul George guy, he's something else. He's an alien. But when you watch games, the simplicity of Kawhi's game is fundamentals. They're so sharp. He keeps it simple. He has go-to moves. Doesn't overcomplicate anything. And I think Kawhi is actually a great example of somebody with a little bit more of an old school feel, even though he's a great three-point shooter. But he's got the mid-post game and stuff like that where he really looks for the mid-range and stuff like that. As far as me studying the history of the game, I just got annoyed with the back and forth that you're talking about. I grew up from an Iranian culture that's like really respectful to elders. That's just like a major thing. So I'm not of the business of just discrediting older people because their opinions might be outdated or because they're older and whatnot. And I don't accuse people of just not getting with the times. I want to see their perspective of them seeing more than me in life. But I will say I started out by being curious as a kid. Like getting into the game in 2006, I was really curious about what happened before me because there was so much great basketball before me. And so I bought like DVDs, like those Hardwood Classic DVDs off Amazon, Sir Charles, Hakeem the Dream, the Magic one, the Jordan one, the Larry one. So I would always watch and study and watch the old games on ESPN Classic and then Hardwood Classics. But then after a while, I was like, okay, I kind of have an understanding of like what these guys were. Like I understand that Kevin McHale had insane post game. I understand that Tim Hardaway's between the legs crossover was, crazy and all that stuff. But then The Last Dance and me getting on social media changed everything for me because I went on Twitter and I saw, and I'm not even, me, I don't like the Utah Jazz. Like that's not a team that I like. That's my least favorite team, like in NBA history. I don't like John Stockton and I don't like Karl Malone, but I acknowledge their talent. And I saw somebody saying like, and this was like before Chris Paul's Phoenix tenure, they were like, he's way better than Stockton. There's no debate, nothing. And I was like, and they were like, yeah, Stockton's not even good. He just passed him alone and got assists all the time through that. And I was like, okay, like I've never heard such disrespect. Like, yeah, there's probably a lot of assists that John Stockton got to Karl Malone, and there is the whole home scorekeepers thing, but you don't just get 15,000 assists for past coaching to one guy. Like, that's when I was like, what is going on here? Like, is this how people talk about the past now? So I was moved by The Last Dance because it just caused so much debate. And I realized, like, have I really been chiming in on NBA history without actually watching the full games? Because you know me, I'm team full games. Kawhi Leonard said it himself, team full games. So there's no way I can judge these guys without trying to put in the proper research because, like, it's just impossible for me to speak about Jordan's career the way I do LeBron's. I've been here for LeBron's. I've seen his ups and downs. I've seen the talk between each season. So then I was like, you know what? as part of my channel, I'm going to start with the first like person that people even put in the GOAT conversation, Bill Russell, and I'm just going to go from there each year and watch every game that exists. It takes a long time. Because the NBA season stagnates my process massively, but the amount of things I've learned, now I'm on 1972, but the amount of things I've learned, like, it's crazy. Like, it's really crazy, the stuff, the way we talk about it. And I think it all began with older players discrediting the modern players. And I think this is the clapback, but now it's become like Republican and Democrat at this point. Like, it's really insane. And it all stems from LeBron and Jordan. And I can't stand that, because I've been of the believer that there's plenty of other guys you can have as the GOAT, because I've really just been so moved by some of these guys. So that's how I feel about that. I think Ant is just one of many people in this generation that are in this world where we're constantly, it's Skip and Shannon on Twitter 24/7.
Yeah, it's spy versus spy, red versus blue all the time. Everything's polarized. That's what gets the most attention. I like to respect my elders, even if I do feel like they're yelling at a cloud sometimes. I wait to push back if they criticize the current era and the modern game and say these guys suck and there's no defense being played anymore. And they make these broad generalizations, because when I do go back and watch full games, I used to be a disciple of 90s basketball because that's what I grew up watching most. When I go back and watch full games now, it looks very different than how I remember it. And I think while Anthony Edwards is wrong in saying that there weren't skilled guys outside of Michael Jordan back then, do I also think there's more skilled guys than ever now? Hell yes. Hell yes. The stuff guys are doing now would only be dreamt of back then. I think international play is a great way to inform yourself of the leaps and bounds the NBA and the basketball game has made, where you go from, I think the Dream Team ended up playing 7 or 9 guys that were in the league back then. And then this year in the Olympics, they had to go through, I think, 61 guys that were NBA players on international teams. Like, the talent pool has grown tremendously, partially because a great part of this is because of Michael Jordan and the influence he had throughout the world. A lot of these guys that have been MVPs recently aren't even playing basketball if it's not for Michael Jordan. 4 of the top 5 guys in the league might be European now or international players. I think the game's never been better. I also think there are times where the three-point shooting and the analytics have hurt the game, even though I think it's what they're doing overall is smart. They're playing the numbers, they're playing the analytics, they're playing the math. Is it as pleasing to the eye? Is it as varied of an attack? Is it as entertaining? I don't know. I still think at its best, it is. It is. But there are times where you see, there's 93 pointers taken in a game or something like that, and it's extreme. But I try to save my criticism for the past until it's warranted when they take shots at guys today. That's kind of my stance on it. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I'm part of the younger crowd, so they're usually the ones taking shots. I am protective of the history of the game because I just feel as though there's a lot of inaccuracies about it. I never go and say that players aren't good and stuff like that, or like I'm not a big time machine guy. I don't like the these guys couldn't play in this time thing, unless it's like, I'll give you an example. Like someone like Eric Dampier, he was a very specific player for his time, but I don't think he's bad at basketball because I don't think he fit today's game. Like, I don't think he's a bad basketball player. He was needed for low post defense and rebounding and toughness back then. But he's not a guy that would really get many minutes today. His skill set isn't quite needed, but I don't think he's a bad basketball player. And it's stuff like that, like just kind of contextualizing the strategy of the game. Like back then, when I say back then, I'm literally talking 12 years ago and prior, you wanted a second big out there for rebounding. Like, it wasn't about getting back in transition. It was about crashing the offensive glass and stuff like that, having a second interior defender. So it was a totally different game. I think the one thing that really inspired me about continuing to watch the old games is when it was COVID, and I had been watching, the spacing, the 4 out, 1 in, and 5 out offenses for a couple of years, and I even stopped taking mid ranges when I played pickup. Like, it got that bad. I stopped taking mid ranges. I was like, 3 in layups, like that's more efficient. And I went back and watched, and I was seeing some things that we just don't see now, which doesn't necessarily mean it's better. but it was just different. Like Charles Barkley, I was watching him, and yeah, he would back down guys for a long time, but every single time down, he was backing down the guy at his position, like not on a switch or whatever, at his position. I'm like, how does he have the energy to do this? Like that was so surprising to me. And some of the footwork and like when I was watching a Dream Team game, like I saw Patrick Ewing catch the ball and just like turn and face, no dribble, just put up a mid-range right over the top of a guy. And I was like that little stuff, like the no dribbling and like the simplicity of it, I do enjoy some of that. And like I'll even go back and watch a 2000s game. And I remember seeing I think it was the 08 playoffs, Cavs and Celtics, and Rondo was getting like a high ball screen, and Ben Wallace came and just rocked him with a hedge. And I was like, I can't remember the last time I got out of my seat and I was like, that's a great hedging of a screen, or that's a great screen. Like those little things, the rebounding, like there's no Reggie Evans today anymore, but he's one of my most beloved Clippers of all time. I haven't seen a guy offensive rebound like that. And to me, that's a skill. The timing of it and all that. But a guy like Reggie Evans is also someone who wouldn't touch the court much today. But I don't think he's like, a bad basketball player. So like that's kind of my thing. Is there's a lot of things I appreciate.
Yeah.
I also think back in the day, like when we're talking old, like 60s and 70s, they were taught to dribble the ball a completely different way, which is like the hand on top of the ball. Iverson and all these guys changed the whole dynamic of how you can dribble a basketball. So you literally could not do the same things with the ball in your hands. So it limited to guards a lot, which obviously partially why it was a big man's game. So you have to just pass and move a lot more. And like watching teams like the old Celtics of like the Bill Russell days, when they get a rebound, it is ball flying and players flying. And I love that. I love these kind of things. So just little intricacies of the game. But yeah, man, I think every era has its beauty. And what you said, like what do you like watching more? That's totally, to me, in the eyes of the beholder. Like to me, that's just subjective. But there's more guys that can do stuff with the ball now. There's no doubt about it.
It is subjective, but I would say for the people who are like, oh, it was more physical back then, and then they show the same 10 plays of Detroit hitting Michael Jordan. And it's like, you guys are recycling the same thing over and over, and they played far more times than just these 5 games that you're showing here.
Well, let me ask you this, devil's advocate. I agree with that stuff, that the plays that they use are a poor example. But what do you feel about the NBA in the mid 2000s and Jerry Colangelo and all them changing the rules to try to help guards out and perimeter players out? Because that 04 finals, that was like really hard to score. Like the hand checking was super hard, like, and the physicality off the ball, they're bumping each other left and right. I mean, I'm not saying this doesn't exist now, but just, there's levels to it. So like,
you can see that stuff in the playoffs today sometimes too. They let you get away with so much more. Hand checking is completely subjective. It is just like an offensive lineman holding in the NFL. How much are you willing to let them get away with before you throw a flag, or in this case, call a foul? It still goes on today all the time. And I have tape of Michael Jordan and guys trying to D him up and them calling hand checking in 94 and 95, and nostalgia heads who just love to say, oh, it was better back then and more physical. And I'm seeing all these touch fouls on Michael Jordan nonstop. And then meanwhile, he's leveraging the rules because they couldn't play zone, so he can ISO against Muggsy Bogues on the far side while everybody else is cleared out because you can't just guard space. You have to hard double on a guy with the basketball. I think that stuff, I mean, in the 80s, the reason Detroit stood out so much is because they were the antithesis of how everybody else was playing back then. They weren't all playing that physical. Yes, there were fights. There was craziness. I don't really attribute that to skill. But if you look in the mid-80s, teams averaged 110 points per game while taking 3 threes a game. They weren't even utilizing a three-point line, yet they were still averaging the same amount of points as today. There wasn't defense being played at all. They were rolling the ball out there and running up and down the court. I mean, even if you go back to Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, the dirty little secret about those stats is they had 30 more possessions per game to accumulate stats. And nobody wants to talk about it, or you're a hater or a bad guy. I used to worship the old school game, but I can't say that things haven't evolved for the better, because what's happened is, to me, the ultimate underscoring point or central point of why the game's better today is because guys that you mentioned, like Reggie Evans and guys who are specialists, they're out of the league because this if you can't do everything, if you can't shoot, you can't play anymore. You have to be skilled at everything.
But we have a guy we might start that's not that skilled at everything though. Derek Jones. He's really just an athlete.
He still can shoot a three-pointer.
By the 30% clip, how many guys are shooting 32, 33%? You can find a lot of guys that were shooting 33%.
It's still a unique thing. Like there aren't that compared to what there were back then. The reason it's gotten so positionless is because your flaws get picked on more than ever in today's game. Defenses are much more sophisticated. People say they don't play defense. It's like, dude, you have to cover so much of the floor. It's so much different than back then when they're lining up inside the 3-point line to set up their offense. It's just, I don't know. I think guys are better than ever. I also think guys back then were great too.
Well, which point do you want me to push back on first? Because we can go on and on. Like I've done this for 5 years, so like I can do this all day. But let me just say this. Let's start with the first one. I agree that there is hand checking that exists, and when I see guys hand check, it actually helps them massively even now because it literally is a big dude putting his hand and impeding your progress driving the basketball. But I agree that the playoffs are physical now, and you can still see those things. But I can't say it's the same as 04 or prior in those playoff games. And secondly,
I'm not saying it's the same.
That's all I'm
just
saying. Because in 06,
it's exaggerated a bit.
Oh, 100%. See, that's why I don't like when people say they make it seem like they're playing a totally different sport. I don't like that. I don't think that. That's why I say I respect the grind it takes to make the NBA in any era. So, like, I'm never going to say that somebody couldn't play in a certain era unless, as I said, it's one of those situations where, like, a Reggie Evans, it's just his game just doesn't fit. But like in 06, man, you remember how many 30-point per game scores came out of nowhere? Like, that was crazy. There was a clear emphasis. And the amount of small guards that have won MVP since they changed the rules is telling. And as you said, let's talk about the zone thing. That has also changed the entry passes of the post and the isolation stuff. My thing is,
people are always saying, why doesn't MB just get it on the block? Because the double comes so much sooner now. Like, it's not the same as it was back then.
But you can still catch. But as you say, as you always see, though, we can still catch the ball, get double team, and make a read, though.
Sure, but they're not going to work. People want MB to play like Shaq sometimes, and it's like, guys, I don't know if Shaq would play the same way in today's game. In fact, I think he would have to keep his weight off and be Orlando Shaq if he played in today's game. For
sure, but if we're talking about this rule change, the taking away zones, Shaq was part of the reason they did this, and the first season after, they still had legal zones. He crushed them. So, like, to me, I'm curious.
But, over time, the defensive adjustments that we have seen, like, it's that cat and mouse game with offense and defense.
100%, but there's nothing that I have seen, like, loading up, because of as you said, right, there's guys that are inside the 3-point line, and there are ways to abuse the old illegal defense rules, but also there's ways that guys try to get away with the defensive three now. And when there's a guy around the rim, back then, you can basically, because I've seen guys sag off and not be in arm's length. They abuse that thing all the time. And that's when I didn't even know about this when I first started watching classic games as a kid, because they would still be just sitting there and they would be, I don't know, maybe a little further than arm's length, and you wouldn't even notice it because the spacing, the natural spacing back then was nothing. So it still felt pretty crowded. Unless you try to abuse the rules by putting a center at the top of the key, like I saw sometimes they did.
You see stuff, though, back then, like the first play of the 91 finals, I believe, involves a technical foul on them trying to play zone defense and leveraging the defense. It's just, they definitely took advantage of that rule. Like, you look at Jordan in the game winner over Byron Russell. That's not happening today. He's not getting some one-on-one with Byron Russell on him like that to take that shot. They are going to get the ball out of his hands. It's not going to be as easy as it was.
But didn't they, to play devil's advocate, didn't they do that in game 5 or game 6 with Kerr?
With Steve Kerr, I know the player you're talking about.
They doubled him and he got rid of it.
But he was closer to the basket at that point. He wasn't out on the perimeter like that, which creates more of a zone. If you're sagging off of him, then it's much more obvious that you're just playing space. Like, he was closer to the basket. He was near the free throw line. So there was a crowd. So it would be harder to call the foul there, the technical.
I would say as far as isolation, I think it was easier for players to score in that regard. But
Jordan said so himself.
But when it's still, even if you bring the zone concept or load up or whatever, you're essentially loading up off someone. They still can get a good shot out of these possessions. And Kobe Bryant, who I don't think is as good as Jordan, but he's incredible, played against it, and he was just fine. And Kawhi does it, and he looks just fine too. And when they load up though on a mid-range player though, like that means that doesn't do anything really at this, unless it takes them away from getting that layup, but they can still get to their pull-up easily.
Look, the greatest players ever could thrive against any scheme, against anything. I'm just saying, in grades of difficulty, I think the stuff you can do defensively now makes it more difficult when we're talking about the trade-off with hand checking, which still happens today. There's plenty of video of it. I just think that is a crutch old school guys use to say, what about the hand checking? What about the bigs? Oh, the bigs who are going to have to guard out on the perimeter all the time now? Like, how is Dennis Rodman getting 20 rebounds when he has to guard on the perimeter now?
Yeah, but the coaches would like Dennis Rodman's switchability now.
I think Dennis is an all-time great defender and one of the best ever on Shaq. And that goes under the radar for whatever reason. But I don't think he's the rebound king like we saw back then, because the game has changed that much. He's going to be on the perimeter.
Don't you agree, though, he's a better rebounder than anyone in the league now, though?
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah. He's just not going to be able to average 18 per game like he did back then. That's not happening.
That's fair, because he has to –
he's a freak athlete. He's a freak athlete. Phil Jackson used to say, like, Dennis could run all day. Jordan wasn't the best athlete. Pippen wasn't the best athlete. It was Dennis Rodman.
I forgot what I was going to say too, but I think that's something I do pay attention to a lot is how you counter certain schemes that maybe you couldn't get away with the legal defense. But a lot of, if you go back a little further before they started like abusing the rules, which is like the 90s probably, you see a lot of counters that are still used today. Like one of the big ones is the fronting the post and then bringing somebody over from the weak side, which you technically couldn't do back in the day. But I saw them do it to
what the Lakers were doing against Jokic last year.
Right.
When they thought they had a scheme against him in the conference finals.
I saw somebody do that to Kareem in the 70s, and the way they countered it was really awesome. And it's funny because all they did was whoever that was doubling off of the weak side guarding Kareem to protect the entry pass was flashing to the foul line, so he would either have a mid-range or that high-low, right? And it's funny because we did the same with Batum fronting Embiid last year, 2023 season, and they abused us with the high-low. So my point is that so many things have been countered and done. I don't think there's anything that we have never seen, is my point. I think you have more ability to do different things after the rules have been, the legal zone has been removed, but there's really nothing to me that we haven't seen at any level at this point.
Yeah, I guess my overall point is just I think we've gotten to a point. It's the same thing with mixed martial arts. There was this time where it was a karate guy versus a wrestler versus a boxer. You had all these different disciplines. And then there was this amalgamation, which turned into MMA, where you had to be good at everything. I feel like basketball has gone that way. Overall, you can point to Derrick Jones Jr. There are still specialist guys out there. But overall, especially just in the last 10 years, your flaws get picked on more than ever. You have to try to be great at everything. Otherwise, positionless league is overblown too. It's just more positionless than it ever has been. And I think the reason for that is because guys are required to do more.
Well, I also think Mike D'Antoni and those guys opened up Pandora's box a little bit with having a four that can shoot and only having one big, because now the spacing changed everything. You know what I mean? That now is commonplace. You don't want to have a second big out there. Back in the day, the power forwards, a lot of them had good mid-range games. Look no further than Elton Brand. He was awesome. But, I'll give you an example, right? I think Elton Brand and Pau Gasol are much better basketball players than Tobias Harris. But Tobias Harris will, with a James Harden and Embiid combo, will make it easier to score with the spacing. And they'll take that big forward at the four. But that's, to me, what's changed everything is that spacing with having a stretch four. And really playing bigger threes at the four. Because guys that were coming into the league as small forwards are power forwards now.
Some of the time when people, I think Elton Brand probably doesn't fall into this category. I haven't looked at the numbers. But when guys think of a mid-range killer, some would bring up Carmelo Anthony because he had that little dribble pull-up baseline and people said it was automatic. But then you look at the numbers, it's like he shot 41% there. Why would you do that as opposed to taking more threes? Because shooting 33% from three is the equivalent of 50% from two. That to me is the math that unlocked everything. That's where people said, okay, why are we taking these lower percentage shots when we can easily score more points per possession? Even if you're a bad 33% three-point shooter, that's 3% below league average. That's still the equivalent of shooting 50% from 33.3%. It's crazy to me. I love the mid-range, and it's like, but it's for very select few guys. You have to be an absolute killer like Kawhi, who I think is somewhere at 47% in his career from 10 to 16 feet out or whatever it is. You have to be that elite. You have to be a mid-range god to really justify still taking that shot. Now, do I think that shot still wins? Hell yeah. Because in the playoffs, and Kawhi has mentioned this before, they're giving you that space some of the time. Even though they know Kawhi Leonard is good in that area, teams are so accustomed to not guarding it, he can even get away with it sometimes and get a little bit more space. So do I think more guys should practice it? I do. I think they should try to bring it back. It's just, you better be damn good at it. Not just, oh, it's aesthetically pleasing like Carmelo Anthony, but the numbers don't line up.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing in terms of role players shooting it is sometimes, and this applies to Terrence as well, when they get run off the three-point line and there's a big rim protector sitting down there, you have that mid-range pull-up, and you should just take it to keep the defense honest. Because then you're just sacrificing a good possession and an advantage that your team created. In my eyes, that really gets me mad. When guys will get it, attack a closeout and not shoot the mid-range because the analytics says that that's not a great shot for them, but then they end up getting a 24-second violation or a contested three out of the possession. It's like, that drives me insane. But anyway.
No, and a player like that, or like Amir Coffey, who seems to be very dangerous with that little turnaround curl fadeaway he has from about 10 feet out. We don't have enough of a sample yet to even know who they can be in that area, if they're effective there. Okay, a couple more quick ones before we let you go, Darian. What's the wildest, most unhinged interview you ever did outside of crypto after a basketball game?
Easily that guy that was hammered after the Pacers game and was like, was it the Pacers game or the Laker game? I think it was one of those two, and he was just like, he was slurring his words, and he was like, I know the people that follow my channel know what I'm talking about. He was like, Clippers number one, and he just kept saying that Kawhi Leonard number one. He just kept saying number one over and over again, and was not leaving. I was doing my own little like closing, because the end of each vlog is my post game thoughts, and he just came in and just bombarded it. I thought that was hilarious.
How many games do you plan on going to next season at Intuit Dome?
I would say hopefully at least half, like 20.
Okay. I mentioned on your show what I'm most excited about. You can't go with that, even though it's too much of an obvious answer. I'm sure you're excited about that too. We'll tease it. But what just gets you up in the morning when you think about Intuit Dome and thinking, this is it. It's finally here.
I've always been a Staples Center lover. It's just been my home. It's where I grew to love watching professional sports. And I'm very resistant to change. So when I first heard about the Clippers making an arena, I was not too hyped about it. I was like, do we really need one? But then the last couple of years, I've started to grow annoyed with how big Staples Center is and how the sound travels and how it literally feels like the upper level are in a different stadium than we are. And I'm tired of that. And when I go to TD Garden, when I was in college and I went there, it did not feel that way because the upper level is not as far separated from the lower bowl because there's not 3 levels of suites. So when I go to the Intuit Dome and I see that was a particular concept for Steve Ballmer to focus on, to have everybody in close proximity to one another, and you see the steepness of the wall, I mean, it's just like Grant said when he came on. By the way, shout out to him. He's a rising star in the media space, in the LA sports scene as well. And he said it best when he came on your show. He said it's an intimate experience, and that's the point. It's supposed to be smaller than Staples Center. So I'd say the fact that the upper level and the lower level are not separated by anything and that we're all right on top of each other, that is what I'm most excited about. The noise, the same fan base. You throw the same exact fan base into a new arena to see what the difference really is with the arena because it's the same fans. I've never experienced anything like that in my life because the Rams came from St. Louis, so I'd never had a history with them. So this is going to be amazing. I can't wait.
He is Darian Vaziri. His mom calls him Darian. I'm going to call him Darian. Some call him Dime Dropper. He's the host of Locked On. He's been doing great work the last couple of years. Took the baton from Chuck Mockler and Will Updike, who I do a podcast with called Clips and Dip now. And you have been doing big work, tough work. You've been on the grind, but I think everybody appreciates it, and I think you feel that appreciation and will it into a dome now when you meet up with fans who have watched you and your shows over the years, Darian. It is a pleasure to have you on here on Clippers Talk. I appreciate the little home and home we did. Part 1 is at Locked On Clippers. This is Clippers Talk. Darian, thanks for doing this.
Oh, thanks, Adam. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you at the Intuit Dome.
Let's go. Before we get out of here, I want to remind you, last couple of episodes, Jamal Christopher, Andrew Greif, coming up. I think we're going to have Jeannie's Alaska on at some point here.
Ooh,
I got a lot of good guests, a lot of irons in the fire for you guys. If you like this one, hit the subscribe button and let Darian know you came and saw him here and appreciate him like I do. For Darian Vaziri, I'm Adam Moslem. This has been another episode of Clippers Talk. Talk to you next time.